Good morning, everyone. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Off to a rough start this morning, as usual. Since I've been doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday shows, every day is like a Monday because I didn't have the system up and going the day before. I'm starting to think I just need to keep it running all of the time. So if you see another of me pop up beside myself, I don't know what's going on. I've been working on it. There was like 2 images side by side. I'm like, I don't need 2 of myself on there. I'm not really sure what exactly is happening. It's never done that one before. Happy Friday. Off to a good start this morning, hopefully. It's a little cool out there. I'm hoping that the weather warms up. And I'm kind of actually surprised, here we before the front came through, I think what was that on Sunday night? I can't really call before that, the temperatures were looking pretty darn good, around the St. Louis area. And at that time, we were talking about temperatures this week and next week in the high 70s and 80s, the lowest being in the, mid 60s in the evenings. Then all of a sudden that front came through and it just changed everything. And I'm so glad I didn't plant everything outside. It probably would have been fine. I don't think it's going to get below freezing, but at the same time, it's going to get pretty darn cold. I think there's one night next week where temperatures are expected to fall to 37, I think, one day next week. And I'm like, that's just a little too cold for my tomato and pepper plants. So I'm glad I held off a little bit. I'm still kind of hardening them off, getting them ready for planting. So I'm kind of slow going it. I don't usually put everything out till about Mother's Day anyway, so it'll be perfectly fine. Good morning, Rob. Hope you're having a good morning. I tell you guys what, I'm glad it's Friday. I'm sure a lot of you are glad it's Friday. Even though I do always work a little bit over the weekend. It's been a tough week. I've had a very, very busy work week. I'm sure some of you have also. And like a lot of you this morning when my alarm went off to get up and get ready for the show. I used to be up long before my alarm went off. I'm still sleeping about 3 or 4 hours a night, but I'd usually be wide awake by then. And then this morning was just not the case. I was so incredibly tired. I'm sure we've all been there where the alarm went off. And I mean, actually, I take that back. I did wake up before the alarm went off by like 10 minutes, but I was so tired. I'm like, I do not want to be awake. I just want to go back to sleep. Like, I don't need a show today. But now I'm like, I got up, got moving. Good morning, Layla. Happy Friday to you. Also, lots on the agenda today. More winning with the Trump administration. We're going to talk about some new things being thrown out by President Trump that are great things. Now, a lot of this stuff I covered, already, on social media because I cannot help myself. Yesterday I saw all these different news stories. I'm like, oh, I could save that show. Or I could say that for the show tomorrow. Nope, I just got to throw it out there when I see it. But we got some new stuff to talk about also. A lot of tensions rising in this Iran conflict, kind of as expected. Although I have to say, I expected more escalation this week than what we've seen, as Colonel Joe Adams and I talked about on Monday. We kind of touched base about on Wednesday, but we're continuing to see a buildup not only of troops but of heavy equipment and artillery and other things taking place in nearby Israel. So something is still in the works. And I don't think that Donald Trump would spend all that money to ship all of this equipment and get everything ready if we weren't planning on using it as part of a bluff. But we're going to get into that, of course. And some of the other things a lot of things I wanted to talk about today. Um, Outside of that, of course, one of the things we're going to cover is Trump's thoughts over the situation with the missing and dead scientists. We've talked about it here before. It's a pretty crazy situation with all these different scientists, either missing or dead, people related to NASA, a lot of them related to jet propulsion systems, a lot of people saying that they all worked on some type of alien technology, whether they knew it or not. Maybe they didn't even know, that's what they were working on. And then all of a sudden, dying in these very mysterious ways. And it's kind of funny because on the show, I don't know, last week, I guess, we were talking a little, just very briefly about MK Ultra. And then the next day I saw the term MK Ultra just everywhere. People are already talking about it. It's just not something I normally talk about. And a lot of people kind of trying to connect those dots between what could cause these different scientists to take their own lives or to all of a sudden be totally normal, then become suicidal or psychotic or some of these other behaviors that we're seeing. And like I said, the other day when we talked about this, I think that was last week, that I don't put anything past anyone. There is a government outside of the Trump administration. I know people, whenever I bring these things up, they're like, well, you're trying to say that Donald Trump would harm Americans or would harm other people. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying maybe Donald Trump doesn't even have knowledge of what's going on. Well, some people think that Donald Trump has the highest level of security clearance, or that the president is at the top of the chain, but that is absolutely 100% not true. In fact, there's a lot of folks who have a higher security level clearance than the president. And a lot of these programs that we work on behind the scenes, even the president isn't given that information. It's kind of a need to know basis. And then at some point down the road, if we put some of these technologies to use, maybe they'll, brief him. You hear about presidential briefings, they'll brief him on what's going on and what we're working on and that type of thing. But there's an entirely separate government, separate from the Trump administration. I don't think I'm telling anything to most of you that you don't already know. Maybe some new folks that may have joined us maybe have not given that a thought, but there is a separate government. Some people say, well, it's the CIA. Well, the CIA is their own entity as well, and the CIA does a lot of things that the president does not know about. They operate in a very clandestine way in which they don't have to inform Trump or Trump's administration of what they're doing. They don't necessarily have to report to Donald Trump. I don't know, how the checks and balances work out. I wish I did know. I don't know who necessarily reports to who. But what I do know is that there is an entirely different government working in the shadows, and they're the true bosses of everything. They're the true rulers, not only over our country, but many other countries as well. Some people refer to them as the cabal or the deep state or Illuminati. There's a whole lot of different names, for the this other shadow government. And I'm still convinced that Obama is the president of the shadow government, the ruler of that shadow government. I've always thought that that was where he was meant to go. That he was meant to be the president here. Selected, not elected. They put him into place. He was trained, probably most of his life for eventually to take over that role. And eventually he did become the leader, of the shadow government. And shadow is a good word for it because they follow Donald Trump around everywhere he goes. I was just reading the other day, once again, that Obama has been meeting with different officials in different countries ahead of Donald Trump. He did that during Donald Trump's last term. If Trump was going to go, let's say, to China, well, Obama would go to China first and meet with President Xi first. And then, Trump would come along, wouldn't have a great meeting because Obama beat him to it. And I really still think that that shadow government goes around to these different world leaders. I think everyone knows who they are. I don't think it's a big secret amongst those folks in the government. And Tulsi Gabbard at one point gave a really great speech about it. And I should probably resurrect that and find it. Back in the day, I put that speech, onto social media. I played it on the show. It was kind of a long speech. And after she gave that speech, if you guys recall, talking about that shadow government, she was placed on the I think they call it the quiet skies list, where she had to have, anytime she flew, a federal agent had to fly with her. So she was not very happy about that. But that's what happens when you out what is the shadow government. Good morning, Nancy. Layla, agree. Obama still is present behind the scenes. Heard he was in Iran. Layla, he has been all over the place. He has been meeting with people left and right ahead of Donald Trump. He's trying to work out his own negotiations behind the scenes. Now, where the disconnect is for me is I'm sure Donald Trump totally understands that this other government, is truly, working things out. If you think about this shadow government being up at the top layer, then the Trump presidency being below that, and kind of the CIA off, to the corner that's kind of over the presidency, but yet under, the shadow government, probably working on behalf of that shadow government much of the time, maybe splitting that dual agency role, doing some things for the Trump administration, some things for that shadow government. And I absolutely do think Obama is the leader of that movement. And some people say, well, that's New World Order, and maybe it is. Maybe it is New World Order. You know, maybe there's certain individuals that are at a certain level where they control all of the world's politics to some degree. And I think that they're very much in contrast though with the Trump administration. And I also think that's why they fought so hard, you know, to keep Trump out. As we've said many, many times, you know, Trump got through, you know, his 2016, he was elected in 2016. Whether we call it this or not, we staged a coup. You know, most people don't even understand they were part of the coup, but they were. The Democrat regime has run this country for a very long time, at least since JFK. Some people say long before that, you know, that JFK was one of those people that got in that should have never got in, and so therefore they took care of him. Whether that's true, you know, or not, it's before my time, I don't know. But what I do know is that ever since then, the Democrat regime has been in control. It doesn't matter who the president is. And it's not a Democrat party. I'm not talking about a party. I'm talking about a regime. Just like there's the Iranian regime, you know, or the Ba'athist regime. It's still a regime that runs this country and much of the world, quite honestly. And when Donald Trump got in 2016, it was because we were so fed up with some of what Obama was doing that many of us rose up and we said, no more. We're not going to do that again. And we came out in record numbers, far larger numbers than they ever expected. And so we did, you know, even though they cheated in 2016 also, our numbers were so high that the cheating didn't matter. And I think that's why they were so surprised. Hillary Clinton, you know, thought she had it in the bag, and of course she did not. And as we know, they bumped, you know, Bernie Sanders out as the winner of the primary and put Hillary Clinton in place. That's a whole subject for a different day. You know, Bernie Sanders supporters winning a lawsuit because that did happen. He actually did win the primary, but they put Hillary Clinton into that place either way. And maybe had they not, maybe Bernie Sanders would have beaten Donald Trump, quite honestly, because there's a lot more Sanders supporters out there than there are people supporting Hillary Clinton. And which sounds crazy to you. You know, we've talked about that in past shows. I'm not going to get into that again today. But, you know, here we are, you know, then in 2020, well, we know what they did in 2020 to win the election. The cheating was just overwhelming, completely overwhelming. They didn't want to take any chances in 2020. So they made sure that they cheated enough that we could never overcome it. That's what happened in 2020. I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know. And I certainly learned that during my canvassing days on Team Georgia for America PAC, because the list that I had was folks that had voted for Donald Trump in 2016 but did not for him in 2020. So my job was to go door to door and say, hey, you know, and my list was very selected. I wasn't going to every door. It was only the folks who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and did not vote for him in 2020. Those are the only people I had on my list. And I will tell you that the vast majority of those people, when I knocked on their door and said, hey, you know, I'm here to talk about getting out the early vote for Donald Trump, and I show that you voted for him in 2016, but you didn't vote for him in 2020. 99 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, 99.9% of the people that I talked to said, "Oh, yes, I did. Why would you say I didn't? I absolutely voted for Donald Trump in 2020." And I'm like, "Well, your vote didn't count." I'm going to tell you, your vote didn't count. So now you better make sure it counts this time by getting out and putting out the early vote. You know, that was my job when I was in Georgia. And that's why we certainly won, you know, thankfully the state of Georgia and some other states as well, because we were making sure people understood that yes, they voted for Donald Trump in 2016, but in 2020, the cheating was so rampant that their vote did not count. It was never counted as a Donald Trump vote. Therefore, you know, Donald Trump, of course, lost in 2020. And you can tell me that's not true as much as you want. I know it's true. I was there. I had the list. I talked to the people. Maybe I think in the thousands of people, thousands of homes that I canvassed, I would say maybe two people, maybe three were like, nope, you know, yes, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016, but, you know, he lost my support. I didn't vote for him in 2020. You know, I'll never vote for him again. You know, again, out of thousands of people, maybe two or three. And so we know what's going on behind the scenes. Then in 2024, it was almost like another coup in a way. We got the vote in the early vote. Had we not gotten it in the early vote, Donald Trump would have never won. And and it's so funny how the dots connect. And trust me, the dots do connect. This is exactly why Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I promise you with every fiber of my being that this is why Charlie Kirk was assassinated. It wasn't about some random guy who was part of the trans world who just didn't like Charlie Kirk. It wasn't about that. Charlie Kirk was very instrumental in getting Donald Trump elected in 2024. And what's interesting, and in 2020, 2016 also. But here's what's interesting about that is, I made a post the other day about Charlie Kirk, the White House. I read, was kind of considering naming the new ballroom after Charlie Kirk, and I posted about it, and people, of course, were freaking out. Non-Trump supporters, of course. So, and one of the comments that I saw so often was, "Oh, they're going to name it after a podcaster, just some guy, with a podcast." That is not what Charlie Kirk was. Charlie Kirk was not just some guy with a podcast, and there was a time when I thought so as well. In fact, when I interviewed him, several years ago, he came into the studio when I was at Real Talk. I kind of felt the same way. I didn't know much about Charlie Kirk. He really catered to an audience younger, than myself. And I remember at that time thinking, okay, the guy's got a podcast. He's got this, super PAC. I didn't really see the contribution at that time that he was making. Not until last year when I actually went to Georgia and was working, and I was, in communication with the TPUSA team, and they were doing exactly what Elon Musk's America PAC was doing. And they had asked me to come. I can't remember if it was, I think I had a choice between Wisconsin and Michigan, but it was heading into winter. I was in Georgia until November, sometime in mid-November, just for a couple days before the election. And I remember at that time thinking, well, if I went to Michigan or Wisconsin, it's probably going to be cold and snowy. I'd rather just stay in Georgia, so I didn't go. But Charlie Kirk was absolutely instrumental in doing exactly what Elon Musk was doing, getting out the early vote for Donald Trump. Charlie Kirk, his super PAC was bringing in millions upon millions of dollars. It was growing exponentially, particularly from where it was back in 2016 or even where it was in 2020. And he was just absolutely instrumental in getting the young people out to vote for Donald Trump. And, I'll tell you, the cabal, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, they weren't going to allow that to happen. They saw the writing on the wall. They knew what was coming next. They knew that Charlie Kirk's TPUSA was going to continue to grow. And as it did, it would be, a formidable, unstoppable force. That's what they saw. They saw Christianity taking hold, once again in places maybe it hadn't been before. They also didn't like that America PAC, and because look what they've done to Elon Musk for America PAC. They didn't like what Charlie Kirk and Elon Musk were doing. And Elon Musk, I remember, had to, really beef up his security. He stopped going to a lot of events. He eventually, had a much lower profile. And why do you think that Elon Musk got that position in the Department of Doge? It was because if it weren't for Elon Musk, if it weren't for Charlie Kirk, Donald Trump would not have won in 2024. We would not have gotten out that early vote. And I have no doubt in my mind that's exactly why Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And I don't blame Donald Trump one bit if he did name the ballroom after Charlie Kirk. I don't expect that to happen. I know it was just one of those ideas being thrown out there, one idea among many other ideas, but I wouldn't blame him at all, because the fact that if it weren't for Charlie Kirk, if it weren't for Elon Musk, we would have never won. We would have never got out the early vote. Those people put a lot of money into getting the early vote out. And had we waited until election day, and that's one thing we stressed when we went to people's houses, they're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go vote on election day. No, 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 no. I know that's what you've always done, but I'm here to tell you, in 2020, you voted on election day, and guess what happened? Your vote did not count. So therefore, you have to go ahead of election day as early as you can, get that vote in before they start cheating. Because if we get the vote in and they know we have the vote prior to election day, then we've got it. And that's exactly what happened. I don't even know if everyone really understands that's what happened, but that is exactly what happened. And I'm so thankful to have been part of that movement. And good morning, Kim. Good morning, Linda. And the Donald Trump administration, we're still winning, still winning. Trump announced several new things yesterday. which I thought were fantastic. And and I'm going to talk about the ballroom a little bit because I know that there's not a lot of support for the ballroom. Even myself in the very beginning, when he talked about having this big, I can't, what is it, like $250 million? I can't remember what the expense was in the very beginning. I don't know what it is now to create this ballroom. I thought, why do we need a ballroom? We need lower grocery prices. We need lower this. We need to, we need better infrastructure in this country. But then it kind of grew on me as time went on. And I do think, and I do see the purpose of a ballroom. For one, it's a secure location. Look what just happened at the correspondence dinner, and we're going to talk about that here shortly because it took me a bit, but I saw the big failure on the Secret Service's part, and I'm going to show you that video. I don't like to criticize law enforcement, by the way. It's something I try not to ever do, but in this case, we're going to take a look at that here later in the show. But think about that. If we had a ballroom, we would have had the correspondence dinner at the ballroom. It would have been a much more secure location. And not only that, but quite honestly, look at the White House. Now, I'm not trying to be picky here. I would be happy to be president. I would be happy to be vice president or any other position, related to the White House. But when you take the White House and you compare it to the government buildings or the presidential residence in other countries, it is like nothing. I mean, it's really sad, quite honestly. It's like the Aldi, no offense to Aldi, of the presidential palaces. And you know that Donald Trump's own home is far more superior to the residence he's living at the White House, which, is nothing spectacular. There's a lot of history there. I would like to be there for the history of it. But I'm sure any president that has to move into the White House is thinking, darn, I got to spend, the next 4 years here in this cramped presidential, residence. And we need more than that for our president, quite honestly. And I hope I don't want to take away the White House. I think the White House should always be there for historical purposes. And I hope they never change it. But I wouldn't mind seeing them at some point down the road build a new White House, a new presidential home, a new complex. And while they're at it, I would like to see them build us new airports, new railway stations, put in some new track. How about that? Build some new grocery stores, some new business, complexes. We're so far behind in our infrastructure. Even when I see photos of Ukraine, you think about Ukraine as being this torn up little, country, and their grocery stores are far superior to what we have here in the United States. If you go to Europe, speaking of Aldi, their Aldi is like this amazing place with walls and walls of bread and bakery goods and fresh produce. And here, again, I'm not knocking Aldi, because I appreciate it for what it is, but it's not the same. We as Americans, aren't we supposed to be the wealthiest nation in the world? But yet we have some of the oldest infrastructure. Look at Beijing, look at Tokyo, look at all of these big, amazing cities and their infrastructure, their office buildings, the technology you see throughout the city, the restaurants and the, entertainment complexes. We have nothing. I mean, seriously, it's really sad, quite honestly. I'm trying to think of comparisons, but I'm pretty sure I'll offend everyone if I start making those comparisons. But our infrastructure is not good, and there's a lot of things we need to work on. But even given that, I still think we need a ballroom. I still think some point down the road we need to build a new White House. We need to build a new Capitol building. Those they can turn those into history museums or something along those lines, or they'll still have a historic signature on them. But I think we need a new complex for all of our lawmakers. Who knows, maybe not even in Washington D.C. That place is just a liberal cesspool. Maybe it needs to be somewhere else. I don't know where. Maybe you guys can guess that for me. And good morning, Karen. Good morning, Brenda and Karen, and Linda. Let's see here. Layla, my husband says the same thing. He said the roads in Germany are amazing. No potholes. Exactly, Layla. There are some countries that have heated roadways with lights all over the place. It's so funny. Some of our roads are so dimly lit. I actually had a bad dream about it last night. Crazy enough, because here lately I've been driving at night. Now, maybe my eyes are just getting old. And I drive a Jeep. My headlights need to be repositioned up a little bit. That doesn't help either. but our some of our highways are so dark at night, you can't see a darn thing. And it's to me, sometimes I think, okay, it's no wonder people end up driving the wrong way, on a highway or the wrong way on a roadway because it's so dimly lit. Our country by leaps and bounds could be so much better. There's no reason why Japan, China, parts of Russia, much of Europe, why they are so far ahead of the United States. Quite honestly, if things here were any worse, we would look like, some of these countries in the Middle East. Like I said, I'm going to shut up before I start offending people. But trust me, we've got a long way to go. It's pretty sad when you think about it. In our capital of New York City, there's some very nice buildings in New York City. I've been to many of them, but at the same time, it is nothing like a Tokyo or a Beijing. It's absolutely nothing like that. Same with Los Angeles. I've been to every big city, in this country, and we have nothing that compares to those other cities. And we've got to start working on our infrastructure. And speaking of, one of the big announcements Donald Trump made yesterday is that he foresees sometime in the future, Americans won't have to pay income tax. There will be no income tax. He said, with all of the cuts we're making, all the money we're bringing in through his various projects, he doesn't see any reason for income tax. Now, me personally, I don't mind paying income tax if it's going to the right things. I don't want to pay income tax to fund the Leering Center out in Minneapolis. Okay. I don't want to fund that. I don't want to fund what, this conflict war that's taking place in Ukraine. Not my business. I don't want my tax money going to that. But if I knew, and if we had a way where they could tell us, where is your tax money going? And they told us, well, your tax money is going to build new airport in your town, or it's going to go, building these beautiful high rises where, these business centers, things that bring revenue in to your city. I would be perfectly fine with that. I would be perfectly fine with that. I don't know that no income tax is necessarily right, but it would be nice, right? The other thing Donald Trump mentioned yesterday was the Trump IRA. I'm sure you've probably seen a little bit about that. And it's a pretty interesting, this is for low income people, which is really what we need. We need programs for low income people where the government is going to give an equal match. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's $1,000 that they will match up to $1,000. So, if you're out there now, this is really geared towards younger people. I mean, anyone can do it. It's going to start in 2027, but it's called the Trump IRA. So you're going to put in your $1,000, let's say at a minimum. Well, then the government will match it with another thousand. I think that's the max. And every year, you put in your $1,000, they put in $1,000 too. So, now you could put in $6,000. They're only going to match, from what I understand, the first thousand of that. But as Donald Trump said yesterday, if a young person starts with the Trump IRA, now provided Democrats keep it someday when they eventually wrestle control back from us, then that could be worth about over $400,000 by the time someone retires. And I think right now it's very difficult for a lot of people to live. I don't know how, quite honestly, how people do it. If you think about it, in most states, the minimum wage is what, $15. A lot of states, it's still $7. And I have no idea how people survive. And I have no idea, quite honestly, how some of them could even come up with that $1,000. The only thing I can think of is a lot of people are getting, this year there was that Trump tax. I call it the Trump tax credit. I don't know what you want to call it, where most people, if you file your taxes, you're going to get that $600 back. Even if you don't really work, even if you just work a little bit, you're still going to get that $600. Just think, if you take that $600 and you add on another 400, and you put it into this Trump IRA, then you're going to double your money. So I think it's an absolutely amazing plan that he has come up with. I don't care if you don't like Trump or not, this is a great way for young people to put money away and to save for retirement. Now the Trump administration is also working on a plan for older folks. I don't know what that's going to be. I haven't heard any details about it, but at some point Trump is going to announce a plan. I don't know if it's going to be an IRA or some other type of savings account where the government is going to assist older folks with also being able to save money, because I think we know, doesn't matter how old you are, there's a lot of people in this country who need some options, or a lot of people in this country who even are at retirement age or past retirement age that have no money for retirement. We see and hear about these situations all the time, and I think these accounts are going to be extremely important. I'm very happy about them. And let's see here. Layla, because of fraud, politicians take the money used for these things. Yes, they do. They take all of the money, and then what do you think they do? They use it for themselves. And Donald says Germany has universal health care as well. Donald, I don't know about universal health care. And the reason why is someone close to me, someone I used to have a relationship with, is Canadian. And he used to explain to me that universal health care, let's say in Canada, is not good. You have to wait months and months and months for a doctor appointment. If you have to see a specialist, it can be over a year, sometimes 2 years to see a specialist. And that's why so many Canadians come into the United States for healthcare, because it's just, even though they have free healthcare, it's like impossible to deal with, and they don't always have the best options available. So I've never been in favor of universal health care unless we can somehow improve on it. I think it'd be a great idea if we could prove on it. And Nancy says, home our vets, also a great use of money. I would be happy to pay some tax money to make sure our veterans have a place to live and have the health care they need. And Pam says, because we're sending all of our money to Somalia, all the fraudulent spending. You got that right. And it's really sad that that's the case, and I'm glad you brought up the veterans, Nancy, because look at our veterans. A good portion of the homeless people out on our streets, guess what? They're veterans. They're people who, would have given their life for this country, and in the end, kind of did, in one way or the other. And now they come back home from the service. A lot of them have PTSD, addiction problems, things that they picked up, while they were in these other countries, and now they're here, and they have nowhere to turn, and there's not really appropriate care for them. I hate to say it, and I'm not, this is something separate from the veterans, but I also wish that we would use some of that money to open back up the mental institutions. And I heard Donald Trump was going to do that. I see cases every single day, not necessarily in real life, but sometimes in real life, at least on the internet, where I'm like, if we had a better mental health care program, some of these folks would have somewhere to go, because there's so many people homeless on our streets that have mental health care issues, and drug addiction problems sometimes, and they definitely need a place to help those folks. And Donald says these countries do pay higher taxes, tax the billionaires and supply better rates. Um, Healthcare, education. My Spanish friend says $550 a year pays $550 a year for college. Now, Donald, I would be all for that. Like I said, there's a lot of different systems in this country that need a redo. We need to wipe the slate clean and start all over again. And it's unfortunate that Elon Musk is not still part of the Doge department, because he was doing a great job with exactly that. The guy is a mastermind of coming up with new programs. And I do think if Elon Musk was still involved, he would be spewing out all of these new platforms that we could use to recreate pretty much everything in this country and make us a better place. And I'm still every day, I hate that Elon Musk is not part of the Trump administration, but I'm fine with taxes if they go to the right places. And yeah, Donald, they don't have to be income taxes. They can be, other types of taxes. And Donald says no income tax equals no new roads, no healthcare, no education. Well, and here's the thing, Donald, and that's something to remember, is that's exactly what Donald Trump talked about, is that we are bringing in so much money into this country right now. Look at what happened with the United Arab Emirates and OPEC. They left OPEC. They're going to be purchasing gas and oil from us, the United States. That's going to bring a ton of money into the country, just a ton of money into the United States, and that's going to fund a lot of things. Look at all these deals. I can't remember, what did they call them? Did he call them the Trump card? I can't remember what Trump called these things, but he had this special card. Do you remember? It's a golden card that he was giving to different dignitaries, wealthy people in different countries, where they could purchase this. They had to invest, what was it, like $250 billion. I can't recall the exact amount, but they had to invest a certain amount of money into America. And in doing so, they would get this gold, like Trump card. And there were several people, particularly these Middle Eastern sultans and princes, who did, invest that money in the United States infrastructure. And, that's money coming in. These are people who don't necessarily want anything back for it. They just want to be part of our economy. And I'm all for that. That's different than them buying land, because that's another thing Donald Trump, announced yesterday. And I have no doubt that Missouri's Eric Schmidt, our former attorney general, was behind this, because Eric Schmidt, if you know the man, for many, many years now, he has worked diligently to keep people, foreign entities, from buying land in the United States, and not just farmland, but as somebody commented, I think it might have been Sandy. I don't know if Sandy's listening. I think it was her, it might have been Paul, I can't remember. But somebody commented, well, yeah, in my area, they're buying all these homes. And that's exactly what they do. These foreign entities come in, kind of like BlackRock. Some of them are part of BlackRock, some of them are different entities, and they will buy entire communities. Every single house in the whole community they purchase, they pay cash, they pay 20% above what the homeowner is asking. And then guess what happens? Of course, if you're the homeowner and you're going to get cash 20% more than what your home's value is, of course, you're probably going to take that deal. And then they buy entire communities that way. They do a couple of different things at that time. They let those houses just sit empty for months upon months, sometimes years. And what they do is they advertise these homes to people who may not have the best credit scores. And so these people are coming in, they're filling out these applications, and for every adult 18 and over that's going to live in that home, they have to pay sometimes anywhere from $100 to $300 a person for a rental application per person. Per person. It's not just one fee per rental application, it's per person over 18. And then of course, fully knowing that these people aren't going to pass and aren't going to get the apartment, or even if they do, even if you apply and pay your rental fee and have a great credit score, they're going to say, oh, we've got so many applications coming in, we're just looking at them. They're racking up thousands of dollars a day in rental applications, never renting the house out because they're just taking in those rental applications. Then eventually down the road, to avoid legal action, they will eventually rent the houses out to someone. But that, I trust me, it's happening. I've seen it happen. We all know it's taking place. And then look at the farmland. What are they doing with our farmland? China buys farmland very near to military bases, and then they spy on us. They're just using those areas against us. Who knows what they're building, on some of these properties. And not only that, but it hurts us, if they take our farmland and they're not actively farming it, well, guess what? That puts our food security at risk. So a lot of things there to think about. And I still haven't moved my desk up, so I'm sorry. I have to lean way over to see. I keep forgetting to raise my desk up. I lowered it one day for a meeting and never raised it back up. And let's see here. I have a hard time grabbing onto my little comment reader. I don't know why, but it's hard to grab onto. And then Layla answered, Donald, not good, takes a long time to get care. I worked for a doctor that worked there. Many people go without care or die waiting to get surgeries. Only wealthy people get priority care. They pay out of pocket. That is also true, Layla. Let's see here. And Layla says, I told our boys to take Trump up on all his plans. I agree. He's coming out with some great stuff. Good morning, Glessna from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Hopefully things have warmed up in your area. I think Glessna was having some snow this week. Pretty cold up that way. Pretty cold here, quite honestly, too. So those are some of the great things that the Trump administration is working on. We're still winning. We're still ahead of the game. Trust me. I went and got gas. I think yesterday, the day before yesterday, I can't remember which day. In my area, it's $4.50 a gallon. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? $4.50 a gallon. I'm not happy about paying $4.50 a gallon. But you know what? We're winning in so many other ways. And I think that the gas is going to continue to go up. I don't like to think that. I hope that's not the case, but I do think it is. I think we're going to see gas prices quite a bit higher. And transitioning into that topic is the situation with Iran is still going on. We have the Strait of Hormuz. We have we have Iran controlling one end of the strait. We have the United States controlling one end of the strait. We're working together. Some ships are passing all the way through, but we, the United States, we have turned back quite a few Iranian ships back to port. We're allowing some folks to go through. So, but we're still, heading into an energy crisis. It's causing a lot of problems, mainly for other countries, not as much ourselves. I know China's being hit hard with it. A lot of other countries are, much of Europe is really having a tough time. A lot of these countries are canceling international flights. We kind of talked about that on Wednesday, because that's like their, kind of their baseline where they're going to have to start cutting things here and there, those international flights to go first, then probably some domestic flights they just simply do not have any jet fuel. They're on a week to 2 week supply of jet fuel, and kind of just barely inching by. And I think that's going to continue to happen. Now, just this morning, and which is funny because Donald Trump, I'm sure you probably saw yesterday. I know people think I make up the news on social media, but I promise you I do not. I actually do have reliable news sources. It may not be Fox National, it may not be MSNBC or CNN, but I do have some good news sources. And it is absolutely true that they do project Donald Trump to win the Nobel Peace Prize, that those nominations are coming in, and that they do project that he is going to be the winner this time around. Now you could say that's a bunch of BS, and that's fine. I have no way to prove otherwise, but that's what the sources are saying. And a lot of that is to do with the peace deal, that he's brokered between the ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And because that was such a difficult thing to do. Now, I don't expect it to last. I don't expect it to last. So I don't know if that will change anything or not. Maybe that was even kind of a bribe, for somebody to say, hey, Donald Trump, we really want to maintain the peace in Iran. So, in order to do that, hey, if you continue to maintain the peace, you don't carry out this big ground invasion, which is definitely what it seems like we're going to do, then we'll make sure you win the Nobel Peace Prize. They know Donald Trump wants that Nobel Peace Prize for his legacy. So they could be just holding that over his head. But even today, still, even though we haven't seen any major action, we are continuing to build troops. We're continuing to bring heavy equipment in. We are getting ready for a massive ground invasion. There's no way around it. No way around it. I wish it weren't the case, but it is in the works. And just today, the Trump administration sent another proposal to Iran through Pakistan. Now, Iran's probably going to deny it because Iran, they just don't care. They're not going to give up their uranium. And I don't think, like I said earlier in the show, that the Trump administration is going to spend millions to billions of dollars for us to send all of this equipment over to Israel to stage it, to get it ready for this ground invasion, if we weren't actually planning on doing it. I mean, is peace, worth that price? And, but at the same time, I see where it could be going in that direction. CENTCOM doesn't usually tell the American people or the world what they're doing. And I've seen a lot of announcements from CENTCOM the past couple of days, which I'm like, why are they telling us that? They're talking about bringing in hypersonic missiles, for the next round with Iran. And usually CENTCOM wouldn't say that. It'd be something they'd kind of do behind the scenes. They're talking about equipment deliveries. They don't usually do that. They're talking about how they've briefed, Donald Trump. They don't usually tell us these things. So are they talking to us? Are they really talking to Iran? Are they trying to say, hey, Iran, you can see that we're getting our ducks lined out. We're ready for that big, large scale ground invasion. And when it happens, that's it. Because, Iran may be able to hold their own, to some degree. They may have a lot of missiles. They may have a lot of drones, but they are, they are nothing compared to the United States military. I mean, we could wipe them out in a matter of moments if that's really what we wanted to do. And so I think they're going to see that we are very much a formidable power. They are holding their own pretty well. They did hold their own pretty well. And I fully expected that to happen. But at the same time, we are much more powerful than they are. We would crush them, if that's really what we wanted to do. We held a lot of restraint, in the past towards Iran, and they held some restraint towards us as well. But this is going to be all out. I'm going to show you this video here. And let's see here. And Jay says Iran will never keep any deal. You got that right, Jay. And Glesna, we also have no threat of nuclear Iran. Yeah, and we definitely don't ever want, we definitely do not want Iran to have those weapons. And let's see here. Let me scroll up for a minute. Jay says 4.89. Are you serious, Jay? $4.89 near you? Holy cow, that's crazy. And Tammy says, get the update app. Let's see, I started using that and it's pretty cool. I've never heard of it. I will look for that, Tammy. Thank you for that. I will take a look at it. I've never heard of that before. And let's see here. Oh, gas prices, yeah. And Layla says, even if it's fake, it's a good exercise military practice. Also true too, baby. It would be a very expensive, exercise. Now, after we talk about all this, I'm going to talk about a little bit about Trump talking about the missing scientists. And I'm going to talk about the Secret Service, something new that's been released, some new video that's been released showing how close things really may have come to going pretty darn awry. But look at this video. Let me pull it up here. Now this is in Israel. They're dropping off heavy equipment at one of the airports. Oh wait, that's not. I'm gonna show that to you later. Here we go.
משרד הביטחון מפעיל בכל רגע נתון עשרות.
That's all United States military equipment. We have vehicles being shipped over there, heavy artillery being shipped over there, CENTCOM ordering hypersonic missiles, which, by the way, are kind of still in the testing phase, from what I understand. Well, some of you may know this. I think they call them Dark something. Is it Dark Horse? I can't remember the name. Dark something, Dark Star. I don't remember the name of these hypersonic missiles, being sent over to Israel to hold. And something is probably going to happen. I don't know what. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it today. But as you can see, we are definitely preparing for a large scale ground invasion, not a limited ground invasion, a large scale ground invasion. And I'm sure Pakistan, they absolutely know this. China has been saying for what, 2-3 days, Wednesday, I think Glenn sent me a message about it, and I didn't see it until after the show, where China has asked all of their citizens to evacuate Iran immediately. As of last night, I've heard Iranian airspace is closing. They're trying to tell all flights to stay out of the Iranian airspace. They've got their defense systems back up and running. See that the United Arab Emirates have told all of their citizens they are not allowed, they are forbidden to travel, to Lebanon, to where was it? Lebanon. They're forbidden to travel to a couple of different places, certainly not Iran or Iraq, because they all know. Excuse me. I hope I don't start coughing because I won't be able to stop. They all know that something's getting ready to go down. So they're telling their citizens, hey, it is time to go. Donald Trump had that call with Putin the other day where Putin very explicitly told Donald Trump, according to reports, that, we are very much against conducting another strike against Iran. Now, of course, Putin has to say that. Is he going to really do anything? He's profiting from this situation. I don't know. And I can guarantee you that Putin immediately called Xi in China and explained to them what the situation is. China probably realized that there's nothing they can do. They cannot, stop Donald Trump. He's going to do what he wants to do. And we'll see. Again, they sent another proposal to Iran today, and probably one last gesture at the urging, I would assume, of President Putin. And they're probably saying, hey, that we're going to give you one last shot at peace. You give up I don't know what the proposal says, but, I'm assuming it's going to say you give up the uranium or else, we are coming for you when we come for you this time. It's not going to be a good situation for any of you. So we'll see how that all plays out. I keep waiting. I've been waiting for 2 weeks, hearing from my military friends that it's coming. And they keep mentioning Monday. Every time I talk to somebody, they talk about Monday. Now, I don't know what that means. Was it, first I thought it was last Monday, then I thought it was this Monday, maybe next Monday. I don't know what's going on a Monday, but everybody I talked about keeps mentioning Monday. And I don't really know what that means. Mary says, gosh, $3.80 gas in St. Charles? That's crazy. Well, like I said, $4.50 here at my house, $4.50, which is absolutely ridiculous, $4.50. And it was like $4.30 for a while. Then when I went and got gas the other day, I'm like, $4.50. That's absolutely unbelievable. It's not okay. All right. So we'll keep up with Iran. We'll see what's going on this weekend. I will promise, I am always right on top of it. I will post anything on social media that I see coming this way. We'll have Colonel Joe Adams on, of course, on Monday to talk about anything that happens. I don't know what the timeline is, for Donald Trump in this new proposal he sent through Pakistan mediators. We'll see where that goes. But keep in mind, one of Donald Trump's typical ploys is that he will send a peace agreement through to catch Iran off guard. They'll think they have a couple days to think about it, ponder over it. They think they're safe during that time, when in fact, we try to catch them when their guard's down. So just because he sent that peace proposal through doesn't mean anything at all. Some other things I want to talk about. Another thing Donald Trump said yesterday, about the missing scientists, which we've talked about this before, the missing scientists. We're going to talk about it more as we move along and on other shows. But I think they're connected. Now maybe that's my small feeble mind, believing that they're connected. And I'm going to play Donald Trump's statement for you when asked about the missing scientist. Now, it's still under investigation. His word is not the final word. He also, continues to say that it's still under investigation. These are just his initial thoughts, that they're not connected. There's thousands, hundreds of thousands of scientists across the country, across the world, that are all working on different types of programs, and these are just very isolated incidents, and he doesn't think they're connected. But I'm going to play the little video clip of him talking about it here.
There's all these missing scientists who had access to classified material. A bunch of them have turned up they're either missing or they have turned up dead. Have you been briefed yet about whether or not these cases are connected?
Yeah, I have.
And can you tell us if they are connected?
Well, so far, I mean, they're individual. We have a lot of scientists, so when you see, you put together 10, it's a lot, but it's, a very small number compared to what overall. We have a lot of scientists. I was asking that question. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of scientists. So, some of them that we looked at are very sad cases in some cases. Some were sick. Some left this earth self-inflicted. Some had other things. So far, there's not a major, there's sometimes a little bit of a connection anyway, and you say, oh, this is a terrible thing. But so far, we're finding that there's not much of a connection. We'll let you know. We're going to be doing a full report. It was very serious stuff.
All right, so you watched that, and I posted that yesterday. Some of you may have already seen it, and to me, I'm always trying to read the writing between the lines, right? And I kind of feel that if Donald Trump came out and he said, "Oh yeah, it's all connected," all the conspiracy thoughts are true. They've all worked with NASA. They've all done this. They've all done that. Yes, I believe it's true. He would look like a complete crackpot, right? He can't say that, and not only that, but Donald Trump is not a conspiracy person. You've heard his speeches he's given about UFOs and aliens, and he may be just saying that, also, so he doesn't sound like a tinfoil hat wearing crackpot like I am. But he, some of us are anyway. And I can't really see him saying, "Oh yeah, it's connected. It looks like they're connected. Something's going on." He's never going to come out and say that anymore. Then he's going to stand on a podium and say, "Yep, superdimensional beings are real. They walk amongst us." Those words are never going to come out of Donald Trump's mouth, no matter how much we want disclosure. And he's not going to do that when it comes to, these scientists either. But the fact is, and I know you know this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, is that, okay, yeah, there might be hundreds of thousands of different scientists, but I'll tell you what, there are not that many scientists who work with nuclear fusion. There's not that many scientists who work with jet propulsion, in the way that some of these people did work. There's not that many major generals like McCaslin who directly worked at Patterson Air Force Base, which is where everything is kept. No, he's one of a very small group. And so when you have these individual scientists who are all part of a very small group and something is happening to them, and this has been going on since at least 2019, maybe earlier, some of the cases I saw going back to 2019 with Dr. Pete Peterson, and they're definitely connected. I feel like I can say that with absolute confidence, even if nobody believes me. They are absolutely connected. And somebody could say, well, that this person committed suicide, like Wilcox. We saw him, police video. Well, I didn't see the video, but we know the video exists of police arriving at his home. He's suicidal. He's on the phone with 911. He's explaining all these financial problems he's having, all this stuff going on in his life. And then police arrive and they actually see him unalive himself, on their camera. So we know that happened, but that doesn't mean there weren't factors that drove him to it. We know that there's different types of mind control programs that the government has. We know there's all of these different situations in which it could affect somebody's mind. It could affect their outlook. It could affect their mental status. So to me, that doesn't say this case is not part of that. Now, Donald Trump is never, ever going to again on any public show say, oh yeah, the government used some kind of mind control or something else, on this guy and made him unalive himself, as well as some of the other scientists, or, oh, we took control of this guy's Tesla, LeBlanc's Tesla, and we crashed it into the guardrail. They're not going to talk about that. That's not going to happen. We're never going to have that type of validation. But I absolutely do believe that they're connected. And Don, good morning, Don. Don says espionage is a real thing. Safeguard our scientists. You got that right too. And that's the other aspect of it, Don, is espionage. Who is to say that, some of these scientists that are missing, there are some commonalities where some of these scientists have one thing in common. A lot of them left their home without their electronics. Some of them seemed a little frantic in the days leading up to them departing. A lot of them left their wallets at home, their electronics at home. They only took a weapon. There's at least, what, 3 or 4 different, scientists that left all their items behind, only took a weapon to just disappear, never to be found. McCaslin being, in my opinion, the most obvious one, and in an area of the desert outside of Albuquerque where it's not dense forest. He's just not there. He went up into those, out into the Albuquerque trails, and he's just not there. They've had numerous search teams out, have not been able to locate him. It's not a situation where these crevices and ravines and tree coverage and things like that. He's just not there. And it's very odd. Did he go there to meet someone? And that meeting didn't go well and they took him. Was he there to meet someone and he agreed to do whatever they needed him to do under threat, or maybe because he wanted to? And so they took him for that reason. Maybe they took him into witness protection. We just honestly have no idea. But I will absolutely believe that these cases are connected, even though they have their own individual stories, worked in their own individual places. But, take a think about this. Look, if you have time this weekend, look up what a plasmoid is. Think about that. Then think about some of these universities on the East Coast who are researching how to create a plasmoid in the lab. Now, plasmoid's a very interesting thing. Some people, again, think they're sentient beings, but plasmoids, there are plasmoids out in space, and what they do is they eat away at our atmosphere. Little pinch at a time, they eat away at our atmosphere, and they've absolutely destroyed, various planets, supposedly over the vast millions and millions of years, billions of years that the galaxy has existed. But we're creating plasmoids in a lab. And at least 2 of the scientists that were killed had been directly involved with the plasmoids, which is part of nuclear fusion. It's a big, long, complicated, read, but definitely go out and take a look. Jet propulsion, one of the other common denominators, they're all working on something along those lines. So it's pretty interesting, at least in my opinion. Again, I don't think Donald Trump's going to tell us. That's not his job. Jay says, regardless if connected, they will never admit it. You got that right, Jay. They will never admit it. Layla says he isn't going to come out and say if it's being investigated. Supposedly, it is being investigated, but how much I mean, they already might know what's going on. So, and not only that, but we talked about it earlier in the show today, that shadow government, the real government over the Trump administration, the real government, we believe many of us do, being ran by Obama back in the shadows, the cabal, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, they absolutely exist. And I can guarantee you those folks know exactly what happened to these scientists. And that's above Donald Trump's clearance level. So how far is that investigation going to go? As soon as they hit that wall that, oh, these folks are involved, nothing we can do about that. So we'll keep up on that too. Another subject we'll continue to carry on about. Lastly, before I head out, and I've got to head out here pretty darn quick, is I wanted to talk about this. Oh, this is the correspondence. This is like a new angle. I'm going to play this first, but I want you to keep a hand in the upper left-hand corner. Then I'm going to show you a still video of this. See where Cole Allen enters that room up in the upper left-hand corner, immediately followed by a canine officer. I don't need this crazy music. All right, I'm going to stop the sound. And you can see where he entered that room, followed by a canine officer with a dog, with his canine. And the canine officer is just kind of standing there. You see Cole Allen turn around. Cole Allen at that time has his weapon out, fully functional, ready to shoot. And that guy, the officer, does nothing. I'm going to show you a still video of exactly what I'm talking about. Then we'll play the video again. Okay, so here's Cole Allen. You see him there. entering into this room just beyond the security checkpoint. Now, here, there's a couple of you know, you may disagree with me when I say this is a failure. Now, me owning a security company, doing security, we do security for gosh for Tom Cruise, we've done security for Will Smith, Mark Wahlberg, Will Ferrell, Kevin James, any kind of celebrity you can possibly imagine. Bill Iger, I've done security for Bill Iger personally, the CEO of Disney. And we do a lot of different security operations for some very high level people. And I know we had Tom Cruise in, and we set up these same type of metal detectors when Tom Cruise was around here in St. Louis. A lot of people don't know these people are coming through St. Louis, but they do. And I can assure you that these people are guarding the president of the United States, the vice president, the director of the FBI, our secretary of war, not to mention most, if not all, of our press, all in one room, which is a pretty crazy situation. These people should not be lax, and they are being lax. And when we set up a security perimeter like this, it is multi-layered, no question about it. You set up your security perimeter, but yes, when all the guests are in and you're pretty confident you're not going to have any stragglers coming through, you start breaking down the equipment because you want to break down that equipment. You want all of that gone, before your guests come back out. So you start breaking it down, start putting it away. But you know what? They're all focused on this equipment. They're not looking down that hallway. So they're not paying attention. That's a big failure, in my opinion, right there. And I don't like to criticize law enforcement. I support law enforcement wholeheartedly. But they should have had people keeping a very intent eye. They should have had people with their weapons already trained because you know what? When you're dealing with security for a president, they've already tried to assassinate a number of different times. Then you should always be on guard. They let their guard down. That was a problem. However, where that guard, them letting their guard down should have been picked up because this is a multi-layered security approach. Prior to getting to this station, they have this guy. You see him over here on the right. You can just see his arm and you can see his canine unit down there on the ground, kind of underneath that security, underneath that metal detector there. It's a walk-through metal detector. And you see that he is the person who's supposed to be picking up the security down that area, and he does. That's what's so crazy. He actually does. We have Cole Allen go into that room to take his weapon out. We have this I'm assuming Secret Service officer with his canine unit going directly behind him. That canine knew something was going on. And I do believe that agent failed to notice what his dog was trying to tell him. But here's what's crazy. And I'm going to show the video again here in a minute without the sound. And immediately, okay, right now, while you see that canine officer there with that canine in the room, they stand there for a couple minutes because that canine knows something's going on. And then you have inside the door, we can only assume, based on the way he comes out, that Cole Allen has his weapon out. It's in his hand. It's ready to shoot. He has to be looking at this canine officer eye to eye. And this guy doesn't flinch. He doesn't react. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't yell out, hey, what's coming? He doesn't pull his weapon. He doesn't, get his dog on the guy. He does not react whatsoever. And that's the failure that I'm talking about. Yes, these guys shouldn't have been as relaxed as they were taking down the equipment. And I have no idea what's going on with this canine officer and why he didn't react in some way. I didn't see this video until yesterday. And Layla says, why didn't anyone shoot him? They all missed. Who were the ones standing along the wall? Layla, based on some security that I do, there's sometimes we have some, just security officers or some secondary people, and they're just kind of there. They're kind of providing preliminary security, maybe not, the high level security. And those women all in that you can see on the video or that they all have gloves on. So I am going to guess these were the females that they had searching the bags. When we set up a security station like this, you'll see those black tables in the video. You use those black tables to search bags, and it depends on who it is. Sometimes we have different security where we are told by whichever company we're doing security for or whichever person that they don't want us to touch the people's bags. We have to use sticks or flashlights or whatever we have to do. The people have to move around their own items or we use sticks or something like that. Or other times we're digging in deep. When Tom Cruise came into town, our security officers, they had gloves on. They got into people's purses. They felt every single compartment. They felt every item, opened every item. And I think that's probably what what happened here. So I'm going to guess those people standing up against the wall with those gloves on, they were the bag searchers. They're still around because you could still have some stragglers come through and they may have to search their bag. That's why they left one metal detector up because, if anybody straggles through, one's going to be enough. They'll check their bags and they won't take down that one until the very end of the event. So they'll take everything else down except for one little station there. That's how we do it anyway. And Jay says the guy shouldn't even be guarding an ice cream truck. I agree completely. And Layla, why did they miss? I don't know. I'm gonna play the video again here without sound, and you can see that they are firing off shots, and they did miss. There's still a lot of talk about friendly fire, but keep an eye again up on that upper left hand corner where the circle is, and you'll see Cole Allen going into that room. You'll see the canine officer following him there, and then you'll see him come back out, and he just takes everyone by surprise. And Layla, the reason why I think that they missed is because it's hard to tell in these videos, but he's a very fast runner. He was moving at a very quick pace, taking very long strides, and he was in through there in a flash. Now, ultimately, the multi-layered security system did work. They are on the upper level of the event. There were other security stations in place. He made his way through there, and you can't see it from here, but there was another metal detector further on that they hadn't taken down yet. He made his way through there also, but they stopped him at the top of the stairs prior to him getting into the downstairs lobby. Now, he would have had to have gone through the downstairs lobby along the area of the red carpet before he met another security team and gone in those doors, or should have. There's another video of a reporter talking about how there should have been security there, but there were just two random girls holding the doors open instead of security once you get downstairs through that top lobby. So, again, I don't want to, criticize law enforcement, and I'm only doing this and talking about this because I run security. I set up, these same security stations on a fairly regular basis, and so I understand that you never let your guard down. Never let your guard down. But I would really like to know why that canine officer did not react at all. He did not react at all. Was he spaced out? Did he not see that his canine was reacting? That canine followed this guy for a reason. These canines are trained to detect, different types of ammunition. So that canine knew something was going on. He followed him in there. That canine knew more than any of these Secret Service officers did, which is really what's crazy about it. But his officer, his agent, didn't pick up on those cues, and how Cole Allen turned around and had that weapon, and that canine officer didn't react. I'll never know. I will never understand it. I'm sure the answers have already been given, in these different investigations that we're just not privy to, but I will never understand it. Now, here's what worries me. The only reason why I'm talking about this today, for no other reason, is that we got lucky. We got really lucky. Cole Allen didn't really want to hurt anybody. If you read his manifesto, well, I shouldn't say anybody. If you read his manifesto, he didn't want to shoot these security agents. He didn't want to shoot Secret Service. He didn't want to shoot, anyone at the hotel. He didn't want to shoot innocent bystanders. That's why he said that he loaded his shotgun with buckshot, because he wanted to make sure it wouldn't have as much of an impact. He was after Donald Trump, JD Vance, and he liked Kash Patel for some reason. That wasn't one of his targets, but he was after Trump and Trump's administration. That's all. Those were his only targets. So as he came through here, his goal was not to shoot these agents. Now, he said in his manifesto that if they, prevented him from getting to his targets, yes, he would have shot them. If they shot at him, he would have shot them. But he didn't want to hurt these people. Now, that's not the mentality of most people who conduct an assassination type event. And so just think, if this would have been a true terrorist or a trained assassin, they would have came out of that room and they would have mowed down every single agent standing there, every single one of them. They would have gotten them all. And because they weren't paying attention, they weren't looking, they would have just taken their weapon. I mean, this guy had a shotgun, a handgun, a couple of knives, but what if this person would have came out, with something much larger than that? Or what if they had strapped themselves with different, whats, which I can't talk about here on the show without getting flagged. This could have turned out to be so much worse. And next time it probably will be. because I can guarantee you the real bad actors out there who do want to do harm to everyone that comes in their way, they're watching, they're paying attention, and they understand that the security maybe wasn't to the level it should have been, for a president. Now, of course, since that time, I think the White House has decided they're not going to put Donald Trump and JD Vance in the same room ever again. And this is just more reason why we need that ballroom. But at the same time, that also makes us a target, that ballroom does if they do have these big events. So I was kind of surprised they had them all together in one room anyway. And Jay says, regardless of the level of security, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Also true, Jay. Also true. And Layla says, you're right, Layla. It seems when it comes to Trump, it's all relaxed and a setup. I wondered about a setup. Now, people want to say who don't like Trump, oh, it's staged. Donald Trump stages. That's not true. I don't believe that for 1 second. I have no way to prove it's not true, but I don't believe that for 1 second. And Mary, how did they get Cole Allen? Did he get on the ground on his own? No, Mary, there's no video of that I have seen. What I understand is that he was physically tackled to the ground just before he was heading to those steps to go down. I mean, if you see the pictures of him on the ground, he is right next to those steps. They got him right before he went down those steps. And from what I understand, it was a physical tackle. Now, I could be wrong on that. Nobody's reiterated that, that I have seen officially, but that's what I'm hearing is that they just physically attacked him right before he was going down because he's running. They're all running behind him. He did not get shot. They were firing at him, but he was moving so quick, they just completely missed. And Jay says, I call BS that he didn't want to hurt anyone. Probably so, Jay, probably so. But he could have. He didn't take any shots. When he came out of that room, he could have had an assault rifle. He could have sprayed that entire room, very easily. And he didn't do any of those things. He was not prepared in that way, you know. But he's also a lunatic. So what can you think when somebody's a lunatic? And Brenda says, I heard he tripped and then got tackled. I heard that too, Brenda, that he may have tripped or stumbled. And when he did, because he was moving awfully quick, and then he had to make a turn right there that you can't see, on video, and that he did stumble, and that's when they got him. And I believe that's probably the case. And all right, guys. Well, unfortunately, I have to run. I am 21 minutes late for work. But I do appreciate you guys all joining me today. I'm glad we got to get some things talked about. We're going to be back on Monday with Colonel Joe Adams. We'll keep an eye on how things are going over the weekend. There's a lot that's probably going to unfold this weekend, but I say that every weekend, maybe not. But either way, I have got to make a run for it. I hope you guys all have a great Friday. I look forward to seeing you all Monday. Enjoy that weekend. I'm Tabitha